Okay, so as I was preparing the talk, I looked at the topic. And I think Alexis was the one who picked it. And I realized it was like ginormous as a topic. So what I did is actually I'm going to split it up into two different talks. So this week we're going to talk about technology and then start to talk about AI. And then next time we meet, we'll talk about AI and transhumanism. And so part of the reason why I did this is because I remember when we were talking last time about reverence for creation. And I realized we didn't really talk a whole lot about it because it's a challenge because most of us don't actually live in creation. Like we live in our own sort of artificial worlds as we've created. And so almost all of us are like one step or two steps or three steps removed from actually living in reality or living in the world. So I started thinking about that when, I don't know, somebody asked it and I really didn't have a good answer for the question. And I started thinking about why that is. And I totally think it's because we live in a technocracy. Because technology has so formed the way we see things and think about things, and how we encounter reality, that we essentially have no sort of connection to like a direct connection to creation. And so like with that in mind, I kind of wanted to talk about and kind of dive deeply into technology, not in the sense of like, okay, run away from your iPhone, but actually, okay, like when is technology good? When is it good for me? What is it for? And actually like, what is its effect on me? So what does it actually do to me? And what does it cause me to see? And how does it cause me to see the world? So I think it's more helpful rather than just saying, hey, don't use this, trash this. Yeah, that's okay. So like, we're not going to talk about like specific like rules, but what I hope that we come up with is at least a way to talk about this so that we all can use technology in a way that leads us to thrive. Okay. So that's kind of my goal. And it might be a little bit lofty. But I think if we actually get talking about this, I think it'll begin to make sense. And so as usual, even though you can't see it, I put the onus on you guys. So technology, a lot of people say technology is neutral, right? Just all in how we use it. So convince me one way or the other whether that's true or not. Is technology really neutral? No, not yet. Not yet. Because a lot of people just throw that around. They're just like, oh, technology is neutral. It just like, and then they go, well, the atom bomb, like atomic energy is good, but the atom bomb was bad. So I think I will define technology, but I just want to kind of go from when I say technology, hopefully you don't just think iPhones. Okay. I don't know. I can tell you 100% Brendan is going to disagree with you because literally he went like this. Yeah.
It's the means in which we live.
Okay. So give me more than that. Like, what do you mean by
various different degrees? Where I don't know if I can give you more explanation than that. And the means in which we live, the how we actually live our lives, what we utilize in order to do that.
Okay. What were you going to say, Connor?
I was going to say, I think we can take it. I think the question would take it in two senses. That you can say technology as of itself and in itself, and I would say in that case you can consider that a tool, and then most technologies can be used good or bad, and so they can be considered neutral, and not to even have something that could truly, as you can truly only be used bad or be bad. But then I think there's another sense in which you can take it and what its actual effect is on society. Like where it might be difficult to find, but like the internet, for instance, just in terms of just the ability to transport data across the world, and say that's a neutral thing. But that does have effects, like real concrete effects on society and on ourselves, and that actually did happen, or do and still do happen. In that sense, that you could definitely objectively quantify that, and it will be good or bad.
Okay,
I think it's bad.
okay, so thank you, John, for getting on there, because Connor just totally fence sat. What?
I'm gonna say, well, not bad. Here's what, I'm not gonna say it's bad, but what technology is that it takes us away from nature. So like, we don't need technology pre-fall, but we're in a fallen world and like. Like the first technology I've heard people say is the garments of skin. Which is not like, technology is something that's not just like electricity and iPhone, like it's something far more than that's like has meaning. It's I think in the sense that it's not. It's kind of like a making up for the fall, so it's hard to say it's like bad because we need to
Okay,
live in the world, the fallen world.
Not add why I said, I said that I think it is.
absolutely.
I think because if you look at, in my view, when I think of technology, and I think of it as it is. And I don't add any feelings to it or any ethics to it. Objectively, I see it as, before I think about the morality of it. I think it's,
Okay,
that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. What were you gonna say, Andrew?
So kind of addressing John's point, I think that if we, and going on what Tom said, I think we like look at technology not as like electronics, but like from secondhand like crafts. Say that in our fallen state, it is at the very least subjectively good for us, maybe even objectively, because it enables us to, right, it's kind of, I guess, like a mandate to subdue creation.
Okay,
And be-
okay. Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
I just think it's pretty neutral because it's what gets to be wrong is if you use it for bad.
Okay,
Well, you do with it.
Okay.
The gun isn't inherent. If the gun doesn't kill people, people kill people.
Well, first Cain killed someone and then he went to see.
yeah. So building on what you said, Liam, what about the effect, not just looking at the fact that it's like how you use it, but what about what it does to you? So are all of you different because you have iPhones or whatever phone you have? And is that necessary? Are you necessarily better for that? Maybe not, right? So there is this piece where we actually become the tools, right? Like in both senses of the word. So that's sort of what I want to get us thinking about. So kind of building on what John said, though, I want us to think about like what we mean by technology. And so Plato in the Phaedrus has a Socratic dialogue where Socrates tells a story about a king named Thamus who has this encounter with the god Thuth, and the god Thuth supposedly invented writing. Okay, so I think writing is a technology. Okay. So Thamus tells him that essentially that writing is bad because now people won't remember things. Okay, so it's totally bad because people won't remember things. They'll actually pretend to be wiser than they are because they'll read from crib notes. That's not exactly what he says, but that's the idea, is that that somehow it will destroy our memory and essentially steal our wisdom. Okay, and obviously this sort of idea of like, what do they call them? One-eyed prophets who can only see like one piece of this, right? So he's totally negative on it. But there's also obviously really good things about writing, right? And clearly so begin to think of the question as to, okay, what a technology is. If writing is a technology, then what makes writing a technology? Let's ask that question. So John, it seems like you thought about this. I'm going to put you on the spot. And then maybe we can work towards having a definition for Andrew.
Put me on the spot.
Okay, I'll bail you out. Okay, so let's start with, because it affects the way we actually view reality, right? Writing changes the way you view reality. So somehow it's this mediator between you and what's real. All right, so it's and not only is it a mediator, it also can be it can be an effective mediator. So it can actually help illuminate reality, or it could be a defective mediator between you and reality. So it can distort reality. And so this is why it can't be neutral. So in and of itself, those writing make reality clearer to us. I mean, when used correctly, right? This is where we get at the question, right? When used correctly, right? It gives us something that and gives us a way in which we can encounter reality as it is. Okay. And so part of then the definition for technology will include something that allows us to interact with reality. Right, something that allows us. Yes, Brendan.
Kind of reminds me of the definition of freedom, where with technology, we keep saying, as long as we use it the right way, well, freedom is not, just doing whatever you want. Freedom is choosing the good.
Right.
Right. So it kind of reminds me.
Yes, kind of.
So we say technology is something that allows us to interact with reality and find reality. And I say that.
Yeah.
Like we,
Just think what is real. Just not like, I don't mean it in big, like just the subset of all things that are like real.
What's that mean? Like virtual things, we say virtual reality. Like
Yeah, we're gonna come back to that. We're gonna come back to that. So what actually exists? What is actually in existence in reality? So writing then becomes an important tool for us to describe and remember reality. Okay. All right, so that's the first piece. All right, that's the first piece in this to sort of begin to think about technology. All right, and so Pope Francis in his encyclical says it's not neutral. He says it can be said that many problems of today's world stem from the tendency, at times unconscious, to make the method and aims of science and technology an epistemological paradigm which shapes the lives of individuals and the workings of society. The effects of imposing this model on reality as a whole, human and social, are seen in the deterioration of the environment. But this is just one sign of a reductionism which affects every aspect of human and social life. We have to accept that technological products are not neutral. Okay, so not only does technology then allow us to sort of interact with reality, it actually affects our perception of what's real as well. That's what he's saying. Okay. So what this is sort of driving at, right, is technology also becomes a lens through which we see the world. Okay, it becomes a lens through which we see the world. All right. So he's not saying we just need to use technology prudently, because it can't be neutral, because the tools we use shape not only the things we use them on, but also shape us as workers. Okay. I mean, simple things, right? Like a hammer shapes the carpenter who walks around with it. Okay. He becomes a different person, right? And in fact, he becomes maybe a person who sees a lot of nails where there aren't even nails, right? And so he has a hammer, and now lots of things become nails, right? Okay. And so the goal of the technology also often shapes us. All right. What is the goal? What is the purpose of a cell phone? Can anyone tell me? Okay, so originally it was communication, but what is the purpose now? Okay, navigation,
Distraction from reality.
probably distraction from reality.
It's for
Yes.
your attention.
Yeah, yes, it is meant to steal your attention. Okay, so then when a technology doesn't have an end, what is it at, what's its actual end then? What's its purpose? Right, so a hammer has a purpose, right? Everyone agrees a hammer has a purpose, right? Shoes have a purpose. But when we can't begin to talk about what the thing is for, right? It becomes an instrument of our power, right? Think about it. Think about the power you have in your hand with a cell phone. Okay. Now I'll ask the question again, like, are you a different person because you have a cell phone? Yeah. And are you necessarily a better person because of it? Not necessarily, right? Okay. All right. So the point, right, is not just that technology is not neutral. We also can't take a neutral stance towards technology and just think, oh, I can just use this, I can just use this the way I find it useful. And it doesn't really matter what its purpose and its end is. Okay. Because, again, picking on the phone as an example, right? Like, reality doesn't actually flow as fast and as smooth as my phone makes me think it does. Right. People don't actually think about and have communication with someone as fast as my cell phone makes me believe it does. Yes.
So when you say the technology isn't neutral, it sounds like what you're saying is that specific technologies are not neutral, not that the category of technology as a whole is either particularly bad.
No, I think the category as a whole is not neutral
It's like. you're saying-
because otherwise it becomes a will to power, right?
Okay, so we,
It's like the difference between like saying that every action or an action can't be neutral, an action either bring you closer to God or further away from God. And so similarly, every technology and use of technology is either good or bad.
so at the beginning, it sounded like you were talking, you asked the question in regards not to like technologies as in a phone or a laptop, but as like, I mean, you've been talking about, giving the example of a hammer, like a hammer is a technology. Which I think we like that's to say is like bad. So when you say not neutral, what are the two kind of, I guess, extremes that you?
Yeah,
It doesn't
so-
seem like good and bad.
So it would like, I mean, we're sort of moving towards this, right? So its goodness would depend on its end, right? And when it doesn't have an end, that means that you become the ultimate arbiter of what's good, right? So in other words, like, again, using the phone as an example, I'll try to come up with a different example that doesn't necessarily have a purpose or an end.
A digital planner. They talk about that a lot in schools. They're trying to get kids to not use Google Calendar because it's actually not helpful. They actually want you to write it down. They even found that students from who are special needs and can't communicate normally, if you can get them to write, they understand reality better than before. And they have better ability to empathize with another. And which is like really, really fascinating, especially when you're working with students who normally are nonverbal.
Mhm.
But if you get them to write normally, you can get them to become verbal. So like they are like moving away from certain technologies and trying to move more towards writing in particular, like writing hand notes because of this fact and because of a lot of resources being poured into that. So one way they do that is like they're really trying to discourage people from using Google Calendar because it gives like an arbitrary look at reality of just these block slots that you have to fill in. Versus instead of like listing things or the way that you list out even the calendar like matters.
Mhm. What were you gonna say, Brendan?
So, yeah, that's absolutely, I've heard the exact same thing with Google Calendar and Google Sheets and except with Google in general, especially in teaching, where we are no longer teachers, we are just the middlemen because of how education is structured, we are not just the middlemen of the information, where, you cut us out and you really make it. But with the term of technology being neutral, I think we need to remember that just because technology isn't neutral, it doesn't automatically make it bad.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would definitely agree with.
We don't want to, we don't want to instantly associate, since it's not neutral, it must be bad. That's hard for me to say, but,
Look at you being positive.
Shoot.
I think you made a great point though with the education.
The train of
side.
thought is not a technology.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I think you make a great point with the education side because
That's what I was-
existing in education sphere, like you look at technology more as a tool than I think anyone else gets to. Because that's essentially like your kids like engulf it into like basically a secondary mind. And you have to kind of convince them that's not what it's designed for. Because like the way you present information really does matter, but like technically these kids could read it from anywhere. But essentially what your job to do now as a teacher is to present them with information in a way that they can actually understand it and not, but depending upon what it is, like not just sway their opinion in one direction.
But but just to make a real world actual example of what you were talking about with the Google Calendar and all, I've actually seen students forget.
Mhm.
I've seen 13-year-old children actually forgetting. Because they got. And where they actually have to refigure it out. Which is, it was quite shocking, when that occurred, and then of course the first. That's it.
Okay, Andrew, did I answer your question, or at least?
I think so. I think I should be just maybe getting into some part we're talking
Okay.
like whether technology is a category that has a character. So it's more connecting that there is no such thing as a specific technology that is not, which does not have.
Okay. All right, so what I want to focus on for a few minutes is just this idea of technology, which is a relatively new thing, by the way, as a way we view the world. So technology as what's called ontology. Ontology is just how we look at things, right? And so the word technology, if you break it down, Andrew already talked about techne, which just simply means making or like artifice and logos, which is knowing. Okay. And so the word basically means knowing by making. Okay. Now I want to think about that for a second. You don't know things by making, right? You know things and then you make them. Yes.
Is it by making or the knowledge of?
It's knowing by making, because techne is first, right? Okay. Thank you. That's actually a good point, right? So immediately when we begin to think about it, right, when we think about what that actually means, right? So it's ontology or logos is a way to look at the world. And so what it says is if the world is known by making, it means that the world can be deconstructed and taken apart piece by piece by piece by piece. Okay. And then put that back together, however it is expedient for me to use it for what I need to use it for. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit last time about that is the general sort of way people look at the world today. Okay. So they look at how created things can be used, not how they're meant to be used, but how they can be used so that I can get whatever I need out of them. Okay. So, what is the purpose of rocks, right? Okay. Like one of the ends of rocks is I can build a wall, right? I can build a wall and I can stack them and build a nice wall. I could even cement them together. But I could also smash the rocks up and make concrete and make a concrete wall, right? One takes it completely and totally apart and makes it expedient in the way that I want to use it. The other maintains the way the rocks actually are by nature. And which one is more aesthetically pleasing to you? Right? I mean, how many of you have seen like beautiful walls that people have made? rock by rock by rock by rock. Okay, again, this is not a thing like, oh, where you can't use concrete. That's not the point, right? The point is that like, rocks have a natural end and we can cooperate with the natural end in which they have, or we can use them for our own benefits. All right, and those are two very different things that we do. Again, no moral evaluation on those things, but just I want you to begin to think about that when we begin to ask the question like, okay, why do I like, these rocks that people put together, when you're going through the countryside in England or Ireland, and you see all these rock walls, like why are those way more pleasing than the concrete walls you see separating the ghetto and, in Harlem or something. And it's not just because one's in Harlem and one's in the countryside, right? It's because there's a certain amount of beauty that comes with keeping reality the way it actually is. All right, so this is where I'm starting to talk about how technology helps mediate between us and reality, right? So a wall's technology, right? Like it's something that was made, right? And it, you have to understand a little bit of the physics of walls and how the rocks are going to fit together and all of that. So there's a skill to it, right? But nevertheless, if you just simply see, okay, what's the easiest, quickest way to build a wall? Well, let me get, somebody to come and with their cement truck and dump a whole bunch of cement into molds and make my wall for me. Right. Okay. So technology becomes this way in which we look at the world, right? And so when you deconstruct, right? Okay, we can talk about this. Like I've asked this question before, right? About why does the moon go around the Earth? Well, yeah, that's always the answer to everything. Why did anything happen? Well, because God willed it. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, well, I deliberately asked the question why, because that's what people would ask, right?
Can we go back to the like box?
Yeah.
What about, I mean, it seems to make sense for rocks where the thing that is produced from rock like concrete sort of is kind of similar to expediting purpose. What about in the case of other things where the kind of deconstruction of material actually kind of creates an individuality, like glass, for example, doesn't really exist naturally, or to use like steel or iron, and we're looking at tools, you have to deconstruct the rock and separate the ore from or the metal from the ore stuff.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, not seem like a deconstruction, but it still actually produces good.
Right. But yeah, like again, I wasn't making what I remember my original thing about part of the issue that I think we need to do is find ways to get back in touch with reality, right? And so there's nothing wrong with, steel and, or glass, I mean, again, like that's a beautiful thing, right? Like if you've ever seen people make like glass and things like that, it's not as if those are bad things. I'm not saying that.
The metal chalice used for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gold doesn't come in the shape of a chalice, right? Like,
Rob's just taking a dig at brutalism.
No,
That's really what that felt like.
no, it's not that at all. It's what I'm trying to get at is like for us to be able to, because part of the reason why most of us have trouble seeing God in creation and the way he's written himself into creation is because of the way we look at the world. Right. And that's what I'm trying to undo. I'm trying to undo our way of looking at the world through technological lenses. Like that's why I'm not making a moral judgment on, I will come down on something to say these like actually take us the wrong way.
That brutalism definitely did.
Yeah.
I actually think your point was proven by the chalice and nonsense, because that's not meant to show the natural, it's meant to show the supernatural. And you're saying how we should use materials to show or nature and its dignity, but we're not trying to show our dignity in the chalice, we're trying to show God's.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a certain sense, right? Like, I mean, you could say like, why did God make gold? So that there would be a chalice, a beautiful shiny object to have gold, like the chalice.
Yeah, we're not trying to to find another balance of technology and everything else in life is not a regress into some primal state,
No,
which is ironically kind of what transhumanism does. So yeah, a distorted view of running from tech in I guess primal way is ironically a similar result of the progressing technology so far that it regresses goes back to the primal state. So it's, and I don't want to also say that it's all about balance, because that's what freaking wishy-washy people say. Well, no, it's true. Okay,
No.
it's
No,
true.
I-
Well, it's all about balance. No, I don't want to balance between certain things, okay? But, no.
all right, so go back to my question about why does the moon go around? And you guys have heard me use this example before, don't answer a question, but
Hmm.
why does the moon go around the earth?
Are you asking like why it goes around?
I'm just asking why. That's it.
This God needed light to govern the day.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so there's the answer that the world would give. Gravity, right? That was the answer everyone in the world would give. That he said gravity is the reason why. And that is the answer to the question how. Right? So we confuse how and why questions. That's our paradigm. All right. That is always our paradigm. Why has to do with like, why did God make it that way? We could probably sit here all day and talk about like, but when now we've reduced why questions to how questions, I now think I know everything about the moon, and so I don't even bother looking or contemplating about it. That's the sort of the technocratic paradigm that causes us to do that. All right. And we could sit here and name all the things that the moon does, all of its effects on waves and high tide and low tide and whatever, right? But when was the last time anyone actually sat there staring at it in absolute wonder and amazement? That's great. I mean, that is a good thing. It's just not, it's not a habitual thing, right? It's not something we do. Yeah. Yeah, because that's something totally out of the ordinary, right? And even that we analyze the sort of the crap out of it, right? Like literally analyze it. So like that's because like we're so used to pulling everything apart, looking at it in pieces, thinking we've explained it, right? And that's the end of it, right? And I know I've used this example before, right? Where like the medieval sort of picture of the universe had the heavens, and we talk about space, right? The heavens, well, it's a really full kind of thing. Space is basically empty except for a few things in it. Okay, that's the technological sort of paradigm which we look at things. Okay, and that's what we want to sort of get away from. And so what happens with that then is there really aren't moral answers, right? Morality doesn't really fit into it, right? It just becomes why do we do this? Because we can. Okay. Now, if you think we would be living in like the craziness of the sort of transgender moment, if it wasn't possible, well, it's not, but if it wasn't at least cosmetically somewhat looks like possible that for someone to change their sex organs, we wouldn't even be talking about this, right? We wouldn't even be talking about gay marriage if it wasn't possible for people to have children, in a laboratory. Okay, so like again, that's the way the world is operating. That's the way it looks, and that's the moral paradigm through most people look, right? And so ethics just becomes, in this paradigm, just becomes a way of trying to get consensus. All right, we're just trying to get the most people to agree that we shouldn't do this or we should do that, and that's it. 52% of people think abortion is wrong, whatever, right? That's it, right? That's the best we got, right? Because we can't appeal to human nature because there isn't a human nature. So And the child is not a child, it's a clump of cells, right? It's just been reduced. Right? All of that is technology. All of that is a technological, because we've seen under a microscope that it looks like a clump of cells. Okay, and it's nothing but that. All right, and that's the point. Okay, so that the world is already under this paradigm, and we can't help but get infected by it. Yes.
Well, I guess more just to add on what you're saying for ethics of I've seen that happen a lot with philosophy as well, where people now study philosophy and it's more just like I consider it more of an observation. Because it's not, let's come to truths, it's what did a bunch of people say a long time ago? Interesting, nothing matters. Like that's also been trivialized, so they use the same word
Yep.
as if we don't bother with truth.
Yes. Well, yeah, there, and honestly, because again, we can't see reality correctly, like truth is immaterial, like literally immaterial. All right, so let's now move. I still really have not given you a definition for technology, and I know, yes. I don't know, like, I don't know what God was thinking for that. I can speculate. I can speculate that, you know, it's meant to reflect the light of the sun, like in darkness, the way Our Lady reflects the light of her sun on us, and when we're in this valley of darkness, right? And
Well, it was probably necessary, it's probably necessary as well to have life exist the way it is.
yeah, it's both, right?
Yeah,
That's
I
the
mean,
thing. Yeah. So, and again, this is not to poo-poo the scientific sort of
Oh, no, no.
explanation, but it's for us to go, I'm not satisfied with that. That's not enough. That doesn't actually encapsulate all that I need to know about the moon. Right, because God made the moon, he could have done, you know, again, I've used this example before, he could have stuck it on a stick and like had it just rotate around the earth on this big giant stick, right? But why did he do it that way, right? Like we're supposed to contemplate that, right? And we're supposed to be able to learn something about him through that, right? And if we, you know, get stuck in this loop of nothing butness, we'll never actually be able to contemplate anything. Okay, so moving, so now what I want to do is to sort of talk about tools, okay? And there's this tendency to look upon sort of technological innovation as just tools. But what I want to do is kind of use it in a again, sort of the medieval way it was used, in which tools were made to solve this sort of a problem right in front of me. All right, and sort of an urgent and specific problems. So they were all things made with a particular end in mind. All right, I need to attach these two pieces of wood. I have this metal spike. It really hurts when I hit my hand against it, and I can't use this beaver. So I think I'll use this giant rock. Okay, like, and thus the hammer was invented. I don't really think that was how the hammer was invented, but yes, yeah. What's a what? I don't know. I was just thinking of a natural thing you could use. I mean, yeah, that,
You better solve.
yeah, but okay, so tools, like in their sense, okay, problem, human ingenuity. Okay, how can I have this problem? Okay, how can I?
Ingenuity or God fine?
Can be both, right? Yeah, it can be both. So one of the things that a tool would always do is put you in sort of touch with or direct sort of in direct contact with your reality. Okay, I have this problem. I have this problem. Or I have this thing I want to do. Like, how can I do this? Okay. So most of our technologies, things we'll call technologies today, don't have a specific end in mind, like I talked about, right? Yes.
Question. Is it still considered a tool from God, even if you're not using it for its intended purpose? Like, a lion's chasing me, and so I climb up the tree. The tree wasn't made for me to get out of the line.
Maybe. Right. No, so like, I know just, so like, I don't have a hammer and I use this, like, let's use a different example. I use a screwdriver to bang in.
Right.
Yeah. Um, I mean, so like, is it technically still, like, am I using it as a tool?
But is it still a screwdriver or is it not a hammer?
No, it's still a screwdriver, right? You're using the wrong tool. Right? And so somehow there's this divorce between you and reality.
Can't it be a hammer, can't it be a really bad one? Like.
I
if-
mean,
I was gonna ask you something.
like, a
Yeah.
Well,
screwdriver is a bad.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really bad hammer.
That's why you get a sledgehammer.
Might be different depending on what you're talking about, like if you're in artifact versus something, natural, because like humans kind of impose the purpose of the hammer.
Yeah, humans get to name stuff, so it could be a really bad hammer.
Yeah. Yeah, so to answer your question, I would say like what that does is it's the wrong tool, right? And what does that do to you when you use the wrong tool? I mean, and in the end, right? Like if you're in the habit of not only will you break the screw, right? I mean, break the screwdriver, but it actually has an effect on you too, right? Like, it's going to take longer. So there's that, but it also like, it actually is formative of your character, right? Because if you're like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm too lazy to go downstairs to get the hammer. I'm going to use like, there you go. There's an act of laziness.
What's the saying? Never bring a sword to a gunfight.
Yeah, well, I guess there's that too. But that's the point, right? Like the tool also forms us,
Good luck.
right? And that's why you don't use the wrong tool. Even if, obviously in moments of desperation, I get all that, but I'm just saying in general, like that. So the point, right? So then now we have, okay, there's a right way to use a hammer, there's a wrong way to use a hammer. All right. Okay, and again, not and so tools then are meant to sort of connect us with what's real. Okay, so we'll talk more about this. So what is the purpose of something like Chat GPT? Does anyone know? Okay. All right, somebody who does know what it is. What is it? Someone tell me.
You could take the cynical approach and say that it's a data collection tool that reduces to a bunch of company spreadsheets. The most useful purpose would probably be information extraction.
Okay. All right, so proper either information extraction in the sense of like from a huge database that is the internet for your benefit, right? So in other words, it doesn't necessarily have a purpose, right? Yeah, no, so like I can tell you it doesn't necessarily have a purpose. Okay, it is whatever people want it to be. Now, when it comes to calling it a tool, is that good for us to use things like that? What does that do to you when you use something that doesn't really have a purpose?
It gives you.
Well, I mean, it makes you the arbiter in a certain sense of the ends of something, right? Like how it can be used. But does it do anything else to you? Like, is there anything necessarily, is there a reason why these sort of general technologies that can be used in any way you want them, are they good for you?
No, it makes people lazy.
They did this virtual reality literally, right? I mean, I don't know.
Doesn't it let you play God though?
In what way?
Well, I mean, yeah, like it lets you create what you want, like in theory, right?
It's relativistic.
Yeah.
Because it's crafted by what everyone
Well,
thinks rather than objective.
Well, it's not just what everyone thinks, it's whoever wrote the algorithm. And so like whatever that person who believes that wrote that algorithm, eventually you can end up falling into that as well. So there's that aspect of it, but it's like people create entire realities for it. And like people already do that with technology now where they create false relationships. And like false, just a false sense of reality. You're plugged into something outside of yourself in a way that doesn't lead you anywhere, but like a pit, essentially.
Well, they offer that.
You can go ahead.
It's like, because there's no purpose, there's kind of just the endless, like, doom scroll, so to speak, which is, that's, doesn't encapsulate everything. But if you use a camera, you use a camera to its end, okay, right, eventually you don't have anywhere else to nail it. You know. But if there's no purpose to a particular technology, then you just get absorbed, it becomes your new reality, because there's no concrete end.
Doesn't that bring you though also too towards, depending upon again, like what you're using, I guess, and how, but like, can it bring you to nihilism?
Yeah.
Cause I think that's the argument I'm making here, cause it's like leading you into a sense of playing God in a way of like, I get to decide what you are. I get to decide what I am. Like, you know, I mean, we got really plagued by a lot of things of like deciding who we were and making our own identities whenever the advent of the internet came up. And with ChatGPT, I think we're gonna find that comes up more and more and more and more, especially for people who are building. Again, not everyone uses it like this, but like, you're building an entire reality, an entire relationship with an AI. You're gonna have certain particular issues of what you can and can't do.
So there is a 20th century philosopher named Eric Voegelin, who he talked a lot about Marxism and Gnosticism, but he also talked a little bit about technology. And he, in talking about it, he talked about technologies, these sort of general solve-all technologies are essentially like sorcery, right? Not in the necessarily like as if they are conjuring something up, but it's just like that, right? So I sit down and I conjure up an answer, right? By and so in a lot of ways, it's just like magic, right? Just like magic. I don't really know how the answer came about, but I know that if I ask the question correctly, so if I invoke a certain formula, I will get information. Okay, so sort of like when Samuel goes to the Witch of Endor, right? Or when Saul goes to the Witch of Endor for to conjure up Samuel, right? So it's very similar to that in the way, and again, not talking about morally. Well, so yeah, so I mean, we can talk a little bit about like, I mean, how it works in that regard, right? So like how it works is it essentially takes a word and then matches it to the next word in the series, right? And uses like a probabilistic model, but it tries to mimic human creativity. So every once in a while, it randomly picks a different one instead of the highest ranked one. All right. And so again, yeah. So yeah, so in your point, like you sort of understand a little bit where it came from, but there's this little piece in O of it that you don't know exactly why it did that way. Right. This is why you can really like ask it the same question twice and it'll give you something slightly different. Or sometimes it'll come up with a word that you're like, I don't even know what that word means.
That's not. Yeah, technology and work. So like that's.
Yeah.
Like I've trained, like I've written from scratch, like neural networks, and trained them with point tests and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm talking mostly in the large language like model, like neural nets, like they're just like computing things like together, right?
Yeah,
Like,
but I mean, fundamentally, like, who's all one too, which is selecting which probabilistic output.
right, but it doesn't always do it probabilistically, right? So it has this random component to it. Where it'll slide it. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yes, but that's how those models now work. Forgot where I was going with this. Anyway, so it's very similar, right? And again, what's the effect? Again, not saying that it's the same thing as like calling upon the dead or something, but what is the effect of giving us the power to do that? What is the effect that it has on you when you can just go do that? Right? Where in the past, we might have a question, we might have to sit with the question for a little while. We don't do that anymore, right? Like we immediately get an answer. We might actually have to sit and think about something for a little while. But instead now we just, let me Google it. Let me see what like Bing chat says. Let me see, like, you know, I check this answer against Chat GPT. I don't understand. Okay, so the point, right, is that in a lot of ways, what happens is when we do this is that rather than serving us, we end up serving it. Okay. So an example, out of this book, which I totally recommend, it's called Shop Class as Soulcraft. It's written by well, he's a professor. He was a professor at UVA. I think he may still be, but and he moved to Richmond and decided he just wanted to work on motorcycles because he wanted to work with his hands. And because he thought he was losing something of his humanity by not doing that, right? So he's talking about he says, consider the angry feeling that bubbles up in this person. He's talking about a person going to the bathroom trying to wash their hands. When in a public bathroom, he finds himself waving his hands under the faucet, trying to elicit a few seconds of water from it in a futile rain dance. This man would like to know, why should there not be a handle? Instead, he's asked to supplicate to invisible powers. Right. So, like, I think we've all done the little rain dance under the faucet, right? What problem does that solve? Other than like infantilizing us. Maybe like we're washing our hands. Is sanitation, is that a huge problem?
Well, perception.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably meant so that people don't leave the water running, as if that's, if I had to guess. Because I mean, even from a sanitation standpoint, most people just put their hand right up against the sensor, right? And like, by that point, they're so frustrated. They're like, so like, okay, so that's a technology, right? Like, what good does it serve? All right, so there is one of our foundational questions. Okay, what good does this serve? What good does this serve? I remember reading this is like a long time ago. It's like old curmudgeon guy, right? He like goes to like this car dealership and the guy shows him, he's like, well, this one has electric windows, and he goes, why do I need electric windows? Guy couldn't answer, right? Like, what problem is there really a problem of rolling down windows, right? Again, not necessarily like, but like, what good does it serve and what good does it serve for me? Okay. So back to the idea then, right? So tools.
No, I'm being serious.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm the only person in the car, I can't physically roll down all.
No, fair enough. But does anyone actually roll down their windows anymore anyway? Really? Oh my gosh. Oh, well, Alicia, I know why Alicia does.
You're rolling them up. She keeps that rolling them down.
She keeps breaking her AC. Wow, I just learned something. I didn't know people actually drove around with their windows down anymore.
The AC breaks?
Yeah, when the AC breaks, short of that.
You don't turn your AC on, and like your AC work.
So the point, right, is that, again, another sort of foundational thing, like a tool always expands our freedom, right? Always expands our freedom because now we can do things that we couldn't do before, right? Now our reality, like what's before us, we're now can move freely within that reality. Okay. And this is why, like, men especially, right? Men actually really want to be like manually competent, right? Like they actually want to work on stuff. And everything in this culture makes that almost impossible, right? Like an engine, for example, right? Like you used to say like, okay, it's intuitive, right? Well, if you understood a little bit about how engine works, you could fix your engine. Now you look at it and you're like, I don't know what any of this does, right? Yes. Yeah. So now, like, okay, now we've taken one step back and we've lost freedom from technology, right? Because now you can't fix your own car. In fact, you can't fix your own anything. And you have to decide, okay, well, like, do I want to throw it away or do I want to pay to fix it? Pay someone to fix it. All right. And that, again, that's like fruit from the, like,
will also give you the power to fix it.
yeah, YouTube will help you. I mean, like, yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah.
But many times, like I've done enough things where I've like looked on YouTube how to fix something and they're like, oh, you need this thing that reads this meter that reads this. And you're just like, you end up throwing up your hands, right? Like, so yeah, so like in a certain sense, we become sort of, I don't know, divorced from our own stuff, right? Like, you know, like I had an uncle who had a car for like 45 years because he kept working on it because it was an older car and he's just like, well, I'll just replace this. I'll just replace this. Like, because it was all like he could do all that, right? Because one, he figured out how to do it, but two, like it was possible to actually work on it, right? And yeah, so like, okay. So let's talk about then this sort of mastering of creation then. And I'm going to use an example from Father Romano Guardini, who actually wrote a lot about technology in the 1950s and 60s. He says, all right, so he takes his a vessel and sails it on the lake where he's at, right? And it says, though it is of considerable weight, so he's actually in awe that he's on a sailboat. Though it is of considerable weight, the masses of wood and linen, along with the force of the wind, combine so perfectly that it has become light. When it sails before the wind, my heart laughs to see how something of this sort has become so light and bright of itself by reason of its perfect form. Do you not see what a remarkable fact of culture is present when human beings become masters of wind and wave by fashioning wood and fitting it together and spanning linen sails? In my very blood, I have a sense of creation here, of a primal work of human creativity. Is it full of mind and spirit? This perfectly fashioned movement in which we master the force of nature. Let the remoteness from nature become greater. It grieves me when I see built into one of these vessels, these noble creations, a gasoline engine, so that with upright mast but no sails, the vessel clatters through the waves like a ghost of itself. Go even further, and the sailing vessel becomes a steamer, a great ocean liner, culture indeed, a brilliant technological achievement. And yet a colossus of this type presses on through the sea regardless of wind and waves. It is so large that nature no longer has power over it. Mark you, something decisive has been lost here. Okay, so he's comparing a sailboat versus like a motorboat. Okay, and he's saying something has been lost, right? What exactly has been lost is this connection with reality, right? So somebody who drives a boat with a motor in it, do they need to know really anything about the wind? Right? Are they in touch with the wind at all? Nope. Then they need to know how to cast a sail, none of those things, right? Yeah. Yeah, make sure they don't run up on something. That's it, right? And so his point is, right, that the something, what is the something that has been lost?
Sailors and sailors.
Yeah, but so, okay, so actually Nicole makes a really good point, right? Well, I mean, some of it's not feasible.
You just use stars and then for like.
Well, no, yeah, what not Nicole's saying makes perfect sense, right? What you're talking about, right, is another piece of this, right? What are the trade-offs? Right? What are the trade-offs I'm making and doing? It's like, what is this reducing my humanity, right? So am I doing like, am I adding a bunch of numbers on a calculator? Like, does that make me like not be able to add any longer? Probably, but am I doing like, I don't know, complicated functions on a calculator that in theory I know how to do, but it's way easier on a calculator. Have I lost anything? No, that actually frees me up to do higher math, right? So all of this, right? Like, that's what he's asking. He's like, okay, what has been lost, right? Because that's what we don't do. We don't look at the trade-offs we make when we use something, like what it reduces us to or makes us into, right? And so, yeah, you've compromised like the ability to swim, right? Within reason. But you've also like in moving the next direction, like you've now like most of us, like does anyone like most of us couldn't tell someone else which direction north is right now, except for the military guy. The military guy could probably tell us. Yeah. So I mean that's crazy, right? Like I'm not faulting anyone. I'm just saying that's weird, right? That just a simple thing, right? Like, okay, which direction am I facing? Right. So that's one of the things that would be lost, right? Would just be, yeah, like I just keep like I just turn the wheel and I just go, right? I mean, it's the same thing like with GPS, right? GPS, helpful tool, but most people don't pay attention to what, like, I could ask someone for a landmark when they went somewhere and they were like, I didn't see a landmark. It just said turn at the next light. Right, and I've now missed reality around me, right? Or the other thing too is like when you go places, people with their cameras. Right, like it's supposed to be like getting this tool not to forget. But most of them are not even paying attention to what's going on around them, right? Aaron, what were you gonna say? No, like the answer is like to know what you're trading off. Because, okay, so part of we. Yeah, well, I mean, I would argue that maybe the cell phone, like, if you don't have a good reason to have it. Right, that's why I said, ask the question. Yeah, well, I mean, there's plenty of like phones that are like now that are not smartphones that have GPS. Right? Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well. You kind of led me my question there, where I know plenty of adults where, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, or even my age where, you know, when I first started driving, this wasn't a question, you know, where we still, you know, our dad still taught us how to, you know, like, hey, you know, go up to the food line, take it back, blah, blah, blah. You know, but this gradually faded away where it seems like adults who are 40, 50, 60 years old now, where even though they remember a time and they reminisce about a time and they'll complain about the current time, they still are reliant on that, where they have forgotten what life was before. That, so how do we, not going necessarily full Amish, though I do sympathize with that. What kind of solution is there apart from, you know, just control the legal thing? You know,
well, I would say like a wise person would measure the trade-offs. Right, would go, okay, what am I losing by doing this, right? Like, I
But then we start with that, and that's great, that, you know, virtue of wisdom, or I'm sorry, virtue of prudency, discrepancy, or discretion, et cetera, et cetera. But, or temperance, but reducing it down, like, isn't that minimalist, which is, can be its own sort of flow and damage, like the Amish, you know, but.
okay, so hold your question for the next slide and I'll answer it. Then I'll answer the question. Yes.
I was gonna just say, I don't think it's such a bad thing to have a GPS. I've moved so many times in my life, I don't even know my own area code. I could not tell you my zip code for anywhere I've ever lived, because it never mattered. But like, that's what I'm saying, like, I mean, you say that, but like,
I could just say, hey, know your zip code.
but like, why? If I'm gonna move in 3 years, why? And like, the thing is, like, and the way that I learned things was like just by going out and doing it, but it's like, I don't think, like, for me, the trade-off is, I will, like, it just made more sense. It freed up time to be able to actually go out and explore things instead of sitting there every 3 years and relearning everything. Like, so that's what I'm saying is that, like, the argument I think that he's trying to make is like, you need to make that decision for yourself. This is where like you have to be prudent within yourself. If you know that like you like, and I mean like, and this is also where honesty and not lying to yourself comes into it. And I think that like this would be true for most people, like you don't really need social media. And so I think that that is something that you could like probably peel back a lot more, but like that needs to be a choice that you make. Because of like, if you're not making it, why are you doing it? Like, it's not for the betterment of yourself. It's not to move towards God. You're just like, you're being forced into something, right? It has to be a choice for internally, at least. Otherwise, you're not exercising your will. And exercising your will, especially in this day and age, is so important. And I think making those personal decisions of like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have this because I do this, this, and this. I need to limit myself in this way. But this thing, like getting a sailboat, I mean, like, it's fine by me. Like, why not? It actually might put you in touch with nature in a different way because there's a trade-off here. Like, yeah, I might not swim everywhere, but like, do I really need to swim 10 miles to get somewhere?
Well, the point with the sailboat, like his point of using it, right? It's, I mean, it's a little bit of a superficial example, but his point is that I don't know anyone who actually like goes out on a sailboat that doesn't love it. Right? That's what he means. Like it puts you in touch with reality and causes you to love it. I don't know. Like, do people love the experience of being on a pontoon boat? Maybe. right? And okay, then that's good. It puts you in touch with reality.
Probably way more with this.
Yeah, yeah,
To that point, like she brought up swimming, if you were on a sailboat, hopefully you also know how to swim too.
Cause
well, yeah, there would also be that.
I was
But-
gonna say, 'cause
but-
probably-
Yeah, I mean, her example was just like, okay, you're trading off one skill for another.
Interesting about what we're talking about, it's like, as we advance in technology, we lose our knowledge. And how to.
Right, yeah, so the question, another foundational question, like, does what you're using make you less or more human? Less or more human?
One observation I was gonna make is that there is something that seems like you really diminish as a human being, because of this touch with first principles, so cause and effect, or, you know, how does this math work, you know?
Yeah.
So like the calculator example, I mean, you know, the calculator allows you to do, you know, higher math without having to worry about these nitty-gritty calculations, but maybe it's a good idea to learn to not use the calculator first, you know, so you understand.
Exactly.
how the pieces fit together, and, you know, it's kind of a similar sort of with the sailboat, you're more in touch with kind of, you know, nature and the way the water moves you up and down, the wind affects you, and, you know, having that experience, and then it's not like you're just magically, you know, point A and then point B, you're actually in touch with kind of the cause and effect and first principles, so. I don't know, I think that, you know, understanding first principles is part of, you know, what makes us human.
Yes, I would agree with that 100%, 100%.
For this same piece of technology, like printing yes, for example, where it's good, but it can be overdone. Like I've run out the rod my entire life, so I have the option. So I'm like, okay, I'm not used to making the trip from point A to point B, normally I'm turning somewhere else. But I know the area well enough, so the option is plug into GPS and don't think about it, or say, I know the roads well enough. It might take a couple minutes longer, but I'll figure it out. But
Or, I
at the
mean,
same time, like,
also, if you are going to a new place, you can drive to the same place 10 times with a GPS and never pay attention, and you have no idea how to get there. Or you decide the first time I'm plugging in the place, I'm gonna look at exactly which roads and what landmarks.
Mhm.
But then, like, similarly, I don't get the luxury of going to the beach or the mountains every week.
Yeah.
But, you know, during COVID, when I said that's it, I need to get out of the house, I asked my sister, hey, want to go to the mountains? Well, I can plug in some location in the Blue Ridge Parkway into the GPS and just go, which allowed me to get back in touch with nature, because I'm driving through the mountains now. Seeing the market, right? Couldn't have done that without GPS at all. But-
Or a map. They have these things called maps. They're actually like maps.
But you don't need to drive and read a map.
Well, no, that you have to actually remember what you're
By
doing,
yourself.
or you have to talk to the person beside you.
But there's not always someone beside you. That's not always an option.
I lost my phone one time. I had no choice but to read a
I
map.
remember
Yeah.
that story.
No choice.
Where are you
I
going?
think the difference in the map though is we have much heavier traffic than they did back in that.
Well, I'm not saying like you should, like, I gotta tell you, like, I grew up when there were maps. We didn't read them while we were driving. We stopped, or we stopped and asked someone, like, yeah, like, yeah, we stopped and asked someone for help. Yeah.
I've never seen someone stop to read a map.
Yes,
I've seen
I agree.
them pull it out in front of them.
All right, so here's the sort of rule that I would give. So technical energy should be devoted towards genuine human good. Hence, there is a need for sound knowledge of human finalities, as in first principles. This knowledge is difficult to obtain, but with it, men would be willing to serve nobler ways of life. This is the key to an ethics of technology. The older view of techne, as articulated by Aristotle, is that art imitates and cooperates with nature. So art, what we make actually imitates and cooperates with nature. It is enfolded within the finalities of nature. And it's talking about not just nature as in what's made, but us. So the question that you need to answer about every tool you use is this actually causing me to grow in virtue or not? Okay. Am I more virtuous using this or not? All right. If the answer is no, then don't use it. Right. Then don't use it. Like if it's drawing you away from perfection, don't use it. Yes.
Necessarily here, in the case of, so the example that prompted me to ask for AI was because there is a startup company that was using machine learning to basically look at all these possibilities of how protein could be synthesized, and then seeing, okay, the probability of success for these 10 proteins. Try these out in the lab, and so then you use less time to try to actually find these proteins, and then just instead get the proteins that the AI gives you and experiment with those. And so, cuts down the time of development for the specific product. That to me doesn't seem like it's growing in virtue, and it doesn't seem like it's growing, so that's why.
Well, but it is actually, you are good, like, thinking just moral, I mean, there's like artistic virtues too, right? Like, does that tool help that person do their job better? Does it make them a better, whatever they're doing, like a better researcher or whatever, right? So virtues, don't always think virtues in terms of, I mean, they are moral habits, but they're also, there's habits of the mind, right? So like, am I actually growing in knowledge through this, or am I just feeding curiosity? But it has to do with, like, there's virtues in your individual arts too that you're using, right?
It's kind of important to like take, with the word AI gets thrown a lot, because people like using AI as opposed to draw attention to what they're using. But there are a lot of different types of things.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a second.
Types of mathematical models that can be like very specific and useful for certain tasks. So it's kind of AI is thrown out these like blanket.
Yeah, and we're gonna try to weed through that just a little bit too when we finish. All right, so one of the things that I want to do is kind of slide towards, building off of what Andrew just said, kind of slide towards virtual reality, and then talk a little bit about AI, and then we'll talk about sort of the melding between AIs and humans next time when we meet. But I want you to begin to think about what symbols are. Okay, so I'm using symbols in this sort of broad way in which we see symbols as ways or things that connect us with that help us experience a reality more fully, or in a way that isn't present to us, right? So begin to think about, again, like, one, how technology sort of affects how you view reality. But I want you to also look at it and in the way that it sort of connects you with reality. Okay. And so symbols are meant to connect us to some aspect of reality that is not sort of immediately present to our sense observation. Okay. So kind of, again, like, a telescope could be a symbol in a certain respect, right? Where it connects us to the reality that is, Alpha Centauri or whatever we're looking at, that's not immediately before our presence, all right? And the reason why I want to do this in a sort of a bigger way is that the symbols we use, right, can either connect us to reality as it really is, or it can disconnect us, right? So the word symbolon just means to bring together, right? It's one of the words we use for the creed, right? It's the symbolon. But symbols can also tear reality apart, which is called diabolon, where we get diabolic, right? So things can be diabolic when they divorce us from reality. So when the image that they create actually isn't real and somehow pulls us away from what is real. Okay. And so the reason why I want to do this, right, is I want us to begin to think about things that we use, like virtual reality. Okay. And again, not to be overly specific. Okay. So first question we always ask with, like, okay, virtual reality, first person video games, things like that. What problem are they meant to solve? What are they there for? So we got boredom. Anyone else come up? Like, is there something that anyone has that's like positive?
I would say
Art.
more realistic view.
Connection.
Connection. So like playing games with.
Possibly training.
Okay. All right. So again, so now we're talking about different aspects of it, right? Okay. So you first asked the question, what is it meant to solve? Okay. So I'm using this flight simulator because I'm in the military and I need to do this. I'm playing this game because my friends are playing with me and we're hanging out. Okay. What problem is it meant to solve? What is its purpose? Okay.
And what about like a first person? Well,
A first person what?
it's for the, like a story, like a novel. You're supposed to read it from the experience. What about like that? Like you want to be engrossed in the experience.
Okay. All right. So then using now that as an example, right? So what is that tapping into? Maybe, right? It depends on the book, right? So, but what is it? It's tapping into is our desire to transcend, right? Ultimately, right? Like if you sort of peel back why so many young men spend so many hours playing video games, like why are they doing it? They want to transcend their particular circumstance, what they feel right now, right? Metaverse, right? Like what's the purpose? Nobody really knows yet because it's not done, and they keep. But part of the purpose, right, is to tap into our desire to transcend. Okay. So one of the questions then in the face of those things is, why am I doing this? Like personally, like not what's its purpose, but what is my purpose? Why am I doing this? Okay, so if it's creating if it's sort of tapping into our desire to transcend, and it actually connects to something real, like a first person book, whatever, is that good?
Why use the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, assuming like the ultimately what our desire to transcend is pointing to.
It's pointing to truth.
Like, yeah, it's pointing to the transcendentals and to God, right? Which are the same thing, right? Goodness, truth, beauty, and God himself, right? And so what is it pointing at? Like, what is it pointing towards? And what happens if it's not pointing towards that? Then it's a trap, right? It's a trap. I mean, it's a trap. It's meant to entrap us, right? In a world that doesn't exist. Yeah, you're not here, and you're not that desire to transcend. You're not actually transcending anything. You're not actually in your mind or your spirit even transcending where you're at. Okay. So when you step into these sort of virtual worlds, again, ask like, what's its purpose? Like, what is this tapping into in me? And what desire is it hitting in me? And what desire is it meant to stoke? Right. Because what happens is, when I use the word trap very deliberately, right? When your desire to transcend doesn't actually map to something transcendent, you're now stuck. Okay, you're now stuck in an imminent frame, right? And this is part of the reason why, like, the world seems to be closed in, and God is nowhere to be found, or because we live like this. Okay, we live in what's called an imminent frame. Okay. And so what we want to do is look for those real gates to transcendence. Okay, and not manufactured ones that point in the wrong direction. All right, any questions on that? It was kind of abstract, but like if someone has an example, I'm happy to look at it and talk about it. Yes. Yeah, so there's this idea, it's a Catholic philosopher named Charles, I think he's actually a sociologist, but his name's Charles Taylor. And he tried to kind of look at the question. He's like, okay, why does it seem like everyone lives as if God doesn't exist? Right. And so what he sort of came up with is the fact that we have removed all of these things that used to point to God. Right. So just even our ways of speech, our ways of looking at the world as something like supercharged with meaning that came from the outside, right? So one of the dangers, right, of a sort of a technological mindset is when you actually become the arbiter of what the real meaning of reality is, it becomes meaningless.
It's a self.
Yes. Yeah, and you're trapped, right? And so imminent frame means we're all kind of just trapped here. And nobody gets out because we're all looking for the solution here, and the solution is not here. And we've in fact built a culture in which the solution, everyone says the solution is here, but it's not here. Okay. And so again, this is part of the reason why I thought this was worth spending some time on, is this actually teaches us how to transcend. Because when you get in touch with the world and get in touch with reality as it really is, there's transcendent things all around you, right? Because God has put them here for us. But otherwise, when we sort of take them apart, and don't see them as wholes and don't see them as sacraments, little small s sacraments of reality, we end up trapped within our sort of within ourselves. All right, other questions? Did I answer your question?
So, well, you mentioned that you don't ponder or contemplate things anymore. Is there a danger in contemplating something in the sense that, okay, if I contemplate it, I may get the right answer, I may also get the wrong answer. But if I look at something like the catechism, right, the answer will be right there.
Yeah, so I mean, this has to do with like, I mean, the two books that God has revealed himself through, right? The catechism is going to tell us about like divine revelation, right? But not natural revelation. I mean, within reason, right? Like there are some things in the catechism we'll talk about that, right? So in some ways, like when you contemplate something, is it really a wrong answer per se?
I think people can read scripture and come up.
Yeah, but what about reading the world? Like, okay, so for like example, like I look at a tree, like what does the tree tell me about God?
Talk about reading this is kind of like when you talk about reading the world, passing what's going down the world, it's been reading the world this whole time.
No, they've been dissecting the world. Right. So in other words, they've like, I don't know if it was a book, they've been, focusing on the grammar and not the message of it.
It might be helpful to like a contemplation in a lot of instances, less is looking at something, so I have a question, what's the answer, and there is like looking at something and trying to like appreciate all the different ways, which is beautiful.
So I guess maybe it's the terminology that I have wrong here, because there's definitely been times when I read a scripture passage, in particular the one where Jesus is found at the temple and like Mary's distraught, right? She goes to distraught. And I'm like, if Jesus is a good son, like if I already caused that pain for his mom, if it was for purpose. And it wasn't until I sat there and thought about it that I was like, it's foreshadowing the resurrection. Like it's foreshadowing the creating that she's gonna be left alone.
Right.
And yeah. But and it turns out like there's another book of like the Imitation Mary, that was actually a good conclusion to come to. But I could have easily been like, oh no, Jesus is just an awful child, right?
Yeah. So are you asking then, like using the same kind of principles about, you mean?
Well, like the contemplation was just thinking about Mary and Joseph's faith. There wasn't any conclusion. Contemplation is absorbing what reality is in front of you, not thinking about. Like this part after,
Yeah, but
that's an interpretation. Interpretation is different than contemplation.
Well, so I would just simply say like, okay, because you have divine revelation, when you contemplate nature, you have guardrails, right? Like if, you looked at, I don't know, you looked at the duck-billed platypus and you're like, yeah, God's not very wise at all, right? You're like, okay, no, that's just contrary to what we believe, right? So, okay, I got to go back and look at the duck-billed platypus. I can't even say it seriously. Yeah, so like that's the point though, right? Like, okay, you would start with a question like, okay, why did God, like, of all the things to make, why did he make this silly looking thing? Right. And like, yeah, maybe, right? Like, and if it does make you laugh, then in a certain ways, like that's not wrong, right? Like he wants to bring joy to your life. And so it's not it's not as if there's necessarily a right answer to it, right? But the point is like you begin to develop the habit of looking for God in it, right? Because he's left this sort of trail behind him.
Everything in nature is pointing towards God, but also can have a very natural reason for it.
Yes. Yes, it's both, right? It's both. But I mean, so I would say just like in general, like if you're trying to do this totally off topic, but like start with like looking for the Trinity in it. Looking how it has like, there's a threeness and a oneness in it. And you'll see that you begin, when you get in that habit of doing it, you'll see it everywhere. Yes.
I don't know what led me to this train of thought, but I was contemplating on the fact that the sky is blue, and I was like, God could have made it any other color, but why did he pick blue? Blue is Mary's color, and it almost looks like the sky is enveloping the earth, and we are all under the sky, and we're all under Mary's mantle. And then I was like, just when I thought our later going to be getting cooler, I was like, wait, the night sky looks exactly like her mantle, so even in the darkness, we're still under her protection.
Yeah. And that's like, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, right? Like, just like that, just like that, right? Right. Yeah, and I mean, you think about like, so what is our atmosphere ultimately does, keeps us from being burned by the sun, right? Like same thing, she's the mother of mercy, right? So she keeps us from being like burned by the sun, right? So yeah, but you're only gonna get that by actually like asking the question. And I guarantee you, like other people will come to different answers and God would say yes, right?
I don't think you're going crazy. I think we're in such a tool that so few people do that. Like last year, as Michael's asked, I think a room probably asked each of us. But I asked people full of 8th graders, because I was trying to get to this point of like talking about wonder. I was like, have you guys ever just been driving through the mountains? They're like, yeah. And you just like look at the mountains, like just we're in awe of like the size and the grace and everything. And they're all like, no. And I'm for shame. Like there was a sharpness that startled all of them. We had met several times before then, right? It's like how do you not, like, if you actually looked at the mountains for more than a couple seconds, I don't know how you can't be amazed, but so many people don't even look. And so for those who do look, who do pay attention, and they start really thinking about it, it seems crazy, just because like, all else is pretty.
That is something that has been completely destroyed. Wonder has been destroyed.
That's true.
Where everything from the take the travel industry getting huge hit, even post-COVID, the bank's gotten worse after that. And it's not because somehow everyone has like, oh, I don't feel like traveling. It's because in their minds they're just watching other people travel via online. They're vicariously, they're continuing to vicariously live their lives through the few people who are actually good. So that wonder of the world is just destroyed.
All right, let's start, at least we can talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and thinking about, starting off with what Andrew said about sort of getting the sort of voodoo kind of ghost out of the idea and what I kind of mean by it. So in general, there's essentially two kinds, and we're really only concerned with one, right? So there's just what's called artificial intelligence, which is all kinds of things that can sort of automate and act as if it's intelligent, like I don't know, the computer that could beat the Go champion in Japan. All right, so it's trained to do this one thing and one thing only. It knows all the possibilities of the game. It can enumerate them.
It doesn't actually. That's what's unique about it, is that it like goes so complex, you actually can't know all the possibilities.
Okay, so
it's actually, what's unique about it is that it's actually created like a mathematical representation, like symbol of the problem space of the game. It's more advanced than humans are capable of understanding, which is why we use human players.
okay, all right. So
Actually,
that being said,
yeah, that's what most like machine learning and deep.
yeah, and those are the things we're not necessarily concerned with, right? That's my point. I'm not blowing you off. I'm just those ideas, like, I mean, it's really cool that we can come up with algorithms essentially that will do these things. Okay, those are not really what we're necessarily concerned about. Although we might be concerned in situations where it somehow has like a power or authority over us. So you'll see like they have now sort of built these machines that can do like therapy for people, right? Like really bad idea. Okay. But in general, these sort of simpler AI machines is not what we're talking about. We're talking about is sort of what hasn't really been developed yet, which is this artificial general intelligence, right? Where they're trying to mimic human thinking with the goal of either putting it in a robot or actually melding it with us. Okay, and this is a real sort of thing that they're working on. Okay, and this is what we're sort of more concerned about. All right, so one of the people who has written a ton about this, the guy works for Google. His name is Ray Kurzweil, and here's what he sort of says about the goal. Okay, so artificial intelligence at human levels will necessarily greatly exceed human intelligence for several reasons. As I pointed out earlier, machines can readily share their knowledge. As unenhanced humans, notice he already says we're unenhanced, we do not have the means of sharing the vast pattern of interneural connections and neurotransmitter concentration levels that comprise our learning, knowledge, and skills, other than through slow language-based communication. Of course, even this method of communication has been very beneficial, as it has distinguished us from the other animals and has been an enabling factor in the creation of technology. All right, so a little bit, he lets the cat out of the bag as to what he believes, right? So, okay, so what does he believe? He believes that the mind and brain are the same thing, right? And so if he can just build a machine, the brain is just a machine. If he can just build a machine that mimics some of the stuff we do in our brains, it can do it way better, way more efficiently. And so you see already the sort of the hubris that somehow the goal is to create a better human than God has created, right? Because we are hampered by our slow communication skills. Okay. So that's the first thing, all right? So he's essentially saying, I look at this and I think we can improve on humanity and make it better. And he thinks that thoughts are nothing but sort of interneural connections and neurotransmitter concentration levels. All right, and so if he can make an electronic sort of make one out of silicone, what does it matter whether it's made out of flesh or silicone? Okay, and so it already starts with this sort of reductive sort of understanding of who we are. All right, and he says all of this, okay, all of this is moving towards one thing, what he calls and is called the singularity. Okay. A singularity is when, in a certain respect, AI now takes control of its own sort of development. All right, and goals. All right, and so at this point, it will have surpassed humans, and you know, we can either get on board or not.
Yeah, a lot of sci-fi movies about that very concept. I think we might have learned that maybe it's not such a good idea.
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, and there's a reason, of course, why there's a lot of sci-fi movies about it, is to sort of desensitize us to a little bit and to find out, so that we'll find out that it's not, you know, we'll initially think, well, that's absurd, right? That, you know, we can't do that. Yes.
Is that the purpose, or is it more born from bigger?
So talk more about that.
So this is a whole thing. Has anybody here read Isaac Asimov?
Watch that movie.
So in some of his writings, Isaac Asimov talks about what he refers to as the Frankenstein. It's effectively one of the first instances is Frankenstein's monster. Scientists that tries to create life eventually winds up getting destroyed. But it's basically that innate human fear that we try to create something like us, and then it destroys us. That's basically.
Yeah.
The Frankenstein concept is don't play God, because it's effectively an innate fear of punishment. Because we are not God, and so it's probably going to go wrong.
Yeah, and in a certain respect, but we can't help it, right? So I mean, again, this is like the perennial sort of temptation, right? You will be like gods. So all the time, right? This constantly throughout history, everything is, and this is just the next thing in that sort of line of thinking, right? So notice he calls it an evolutionary process, right? So he thinks biological evolution is over, and now it's time for technological evolution to take over. Okay.
Disaster.
You think?
We can just wait a couple million years and then we'll get
Yeah, exactly. It'll happen naturally. Okay, so So notice though, like, there are some things within our culture that actually are sort of setting us up for this, right? And desensitizing us to dissent, right? Well, one of the things is, okay, like Chat GPT, for example, or maybe search engines or whatever. We start getting comfortable with interacting with AI, right? We start having conversations with them. There's also all these like household robots, like, you know, like your Roomba, whatever, like all these things that are robotic, right? We get comfortable with having them around and in our house. Yes, Connor.
So I know this guy thinks that we're all just special teams, but we're actually not. And like those things, like AI doesn't actually know anything. It all does is that I think it's about that probabilistic models. Is it even possible for something like that? Because it will never achieve consciousness, and it will never achieve like any immaterial concept, because it has to be able to break it down to 300 zeros. So I mean, is there any something like that? I'm just trying to, the next thing I was thinking about, it can never conceive them in, like it doesn't have a purpose for itself.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, and I'll tell you how in a second. But what I want to like sort of the caution with this, right, is for us not to not cede control over to this, like, and not be in a habit of ceding control over to it, right? And the reason why is the way in which I think it's a possibility, and it has to be with the book of Revelation with the beast, right? So I'm not saying this is the Antichrist, all right, but maybe it is. What I am saying though, is Revelation 13 talks about the image, that the beast makes this image that appears to be intelligent and smart and act like the beast. All right. So the image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast. So the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. All right. So in this sort of in the end times, there will be the Antichrist will make this image of himself that actually is intelligent and walks around, and apparently is actually the one making decisions to kill the Christians. Okay. Yes, kind of.
Is intelligent or acts intelligent?
Acts intelligent. So here's the point, right? Well, yes and no.
Intelligence taken in philosophy.
Yeah, no. So there's no reason not to assume that it's not intelligent, because it's a demon, right? And so this is the danger with all of this, is that when you cede control over to it, so how many of you heard about like the moratorium, that they wanted to put a moratorium on the development of AI? Did any of you hear about this? It was about a year ago. Like all of them got together and like, we really shouldn't be doing this anymore. And you know what they did? They kept doing it because they felt compelled to do it. They felt compelled to do it. Why would you feel compelled to do something you shouldn't do? Right? If you actually go back to the Manhattan Project, they felt the same thing. They were like, yeah, like we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this. Hey, look what we did. Right? Something was compelling them, right? And this is where Romano Guardini comes back in when he talks about one of the sort of effects of the modern world is we blame they a lot. They do this, they do that. Who is they? You ask who they is, right? Who is they that does that? You know who they is? They is demons, right? And his point is, right, that what we've built is a world where there's no agency for many of the evil things that happen. Think about that for a second. Lots of bad things happen and we can't blame anyone really. We might be able to blame the system. And so we just kind of have this generic they. They did this. The libs did this. The conservatives did this. Whatever, right? But we can't actually assign agency to it. his point is actually you can. Because there is a mind behind the destructive elements of the culture. And the mind is the devil. And so where I see this going, this is not to be like, seeing the devil around every corner. This can easily appear to be intelligent because it actually does have an intelligence behind it. Right? Just not the one they think they're invoking. And there have been exorcists who actually are talking about people having encounters with demons through AI. Yes.
Oh.
Like suddenly, like the person will be like trying to agitate the chat, and it will suddenly get extremely personal and extremely violent.
AI?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Like I know all this about you, and I'm coming to get you. As if there's a person behind it, because there is. Right. And so this is not to like, again, just to kind of just throw the devil into the thing and be like, yeah, like this is an antichrist. No, this has all the makings of something that can be used by him. Right. Because what is it doing? It's promising to make us like gods, and it's promising to annihilate us as human beings. Right. To destroy our nature and to make us like alleged with the promise to make us like gods. Have we ever fallen for that before?
Every time.
Right? And so this is why I think like to intelligently resist this, like on its own, they're never going to be able to create what they want. They cannot create artificial general intelligence, right? Because we have a immaterial soul. Our intellect is immaterial, right? Now, can they make things that sort of mimic it and look a lot like it? Yeah, probably, right? Can they ever make a machine that when it lies to you, it cares that it lies to you? Probably not. But can somebody else use the machine in a way? And that's why we don't want to become beholden to it.
If they're talking about like, oh, let's merge AI with human, does that imbue it with a soul because you're merging it with something that has a soul?
I mean, assuming that like that could actually happen. I mean, what would that actually become? I don't know. Like, I mean, you would assume it would be like, sort of like the neural link thing they're doing, like where it's still a human being and they now have and it hasn't killed them and made them into, something possessed. Yes.
Until they make you say.
Yeah, at the point.
All right. I think we kind of already talked about the sort of what to do, but Neil Postman wrote a book called Technopoly about 30 years ago. And he just basically, at the end of it, he just says to be a resistance fighter. And it's not by, becoming, going off and living in the woods somewhere. It's just rejecting what isn't good for you, what isn't good for us, what isn't good for mankind. All right. And he even talks about it. A resistance fighter understands that technology must never be accepted as part of the natural order of things. That every technology, from an IQ test to an automobile to a television set to a computer, is a product of a particular economic and political context and carries with it a program, an agenda, and a philosophy that may or may not be life-enhancing, and that therefore requires scrutiny, criticism, and control. In short, a technological resistance fighter maintains an epistemological and psychic distance from any technology, so that it always appears somewhat strange, never inevitable, and never natural. All right, questions? Yes.
Do you feel like it alienates us, or is it sort of a positive effect in the industrial revolution? We're not able to have a society to be free.